What's up, everybody? Welcome to this special edition of the BREWtally Speaking Podcast, the official podcast of MetalNexus.net, where you can get all your show reviews, concert photos, and oh so much more. Rolling solo on this one. You heard me talk about this a couple of weeks ago. Basically, we are doing a 5-part installment series of the top 5 records that influenced the members of Misery Signals. Jesse reached out to me on Facebook a couple of weeks ago and ran the idea by me, and I said it sounded like a lot of fun. I mean, Misery Signals is one of my favorite bands, as you heard Dan and I discuss on discography discussion, and getting to learn more about the people and the music that influenced them sounded like a really fun thing. Getting to just learn more about the band and what has influenced them along the way sounded like a great time, and just a kind of a cool concept that I've not really seen done necessarily on another podcast. So good to keep this short. Basically, Jesse and I kind of hit the ground running on this one. He called me and we just started going, and I threw in the music in the background as well, so you're actually going to hear some songs from the records that Jesse talks about. Don't know when the next one will be coming up. Ryan is currently on a vacation, and haven't really been able to get in contact with the other guys, but looking to kind of just throw these out sporadically. And with all of that, we're going to get right into it. But first, let's get all the plugs out of the way. If you would like to keep up with Misery Signals, it's real simple. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter at Misery Signals. If you would like to keep up with Jesse, simple enough, go to Instagram, Jesse Zaraska, Zaraska. You can go to miserysignalsmusic.com and keep up with everything there. Website hasn't been updated in a little while, but I would imagine with a lot of the new dates, getting announced with Darkest Hour and Sect and so forth, and those kind of things, and the Furnace Fest update, and new music coming presumably in the new year, that there will be a lot of updates. So head over there and keep up with everything. If you would like to keep up with Metal Nexus, simple enough, metalnexus.net, Metal Nexus on Facebook, metal.nexus on Instagram, and metal_nexus on Twitter. And if you would like to keep up with all things this podcast, go to BrewSpeakPod, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Check out our YouTube channel. We do have everything over there, as well as some videos. And if you would like to keep up with our show sponsors, we have The Bean Bastard. Go to thebeanbastard.com, get you some coffee. Looks like things are ramping up over there, doing lots of cool things over there. So go grab some coffee. Let them know that we sent you. Check them out on Facebook at The Bean Bastard, Instagram at The Bean Bastard Coffee. On Point Pomade. Go ahead and go to onpointpomade.com. Use BSP15 and get 15% off your total purchase order. Let them know that we are supporting them for supporting us over here. Check them out on Point Pomade on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, let them know that we sent you. That's how we keep everything growing. We love working with these companies, and we want to continue to support them. So without further ado, this is my conversation with Jesse, and I will talk to you all next time. What's up, dude?
How you doing, brother?
Doing good. Getting wrapped up in some nostalgia.
Good. What did you get watching?
Today is Aaliyah's 41st birthday, if she would have still been around. So I've been watching a bunch of Aaliyah videos.
Cool.
It's wild to realize, I subconsciously I didn't realize it was her birthday today. And then when my wife and I went to go have some drinks with some friends and so forth, I just threw on one of my Aaliyah shirts, and someone tagged me in a post, and they're like, "Did you know it was her birthday today?" And I was like, "Absolutely not." But I just so happened to be wearing an Aaliyah shirt. It was almost serendipitous that I knew it was the anniversary of her passing and so forth, or her birthday, at least at this point. So
right.
It's just, I don't know. It's really weird. It's kind of weird. In the last, I'd say 7 years or so, I've really just kind of become really engrossed in her career and what she could have done and all these kind of things. And it's kind of weird to look back and just be like, man, you were on the precipice of so much greatness, and it just didn't come to fruition. Right. I know not many are big into Aaliyah or late 90s, early 2000s R&B.
I never got into that kind of stuff growing up very much. Yeah. But in the last maybe decade and a bit, I've grown to really, really, really like a lot of that kind of stuff. A lot of old Marvin Gaye stuff I really got into in the last decade. some like earlier John Legend stuff I really like, but like kind of got into that through hip hop, I guess. I'm not a big hip hop guy, but Ryan Morgan very much is. And when we were younger in Misery Signals, he would play a lot of hip hop that had that R&B, samples, or like, Common is a guy that he played quite a bit.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of opened doors for me to accept more of hip hop stuff, because growing up, I mean, all my friends were super into, NWA and Easy and all that kind of stuff. And I mean, I gravitated towards it over time, just because my friends listened to it and it kind of reminded me of them or something. Like, as I got into my 20s and stuff, I was never a big hip hop guy, but that stuff would, remind me of being a teenager, and I could deal with it because it reminded me of my friends, kind of thing. But when Ryan started to expose me, in Misery Signals, to a lot more, I would say, more intelligent hip hop,
yes,
a lot of stuff with lyrics that I could gravitate more towards, stuff that I could play for my grandmother, or I could play for children or something like that. And a lot of that stuff, it seemed, leaned heavily or more heavily on the R&B, and that was definitely a time when some doors were opened to me, and I started to accept styles of music that I was not really exposed to much in my youth. So that kind of stuff that Common did definitely kind of opened the door to me, listening to a lot of different R&B as in the last decade or so, and I definitely have grown to appreciate it on a much deeper level.
Well, I think the thing that's interesting to me is, like, my wife, didn't have MTV and didn't really grow up around the early 90s hip-hop scene and so forth, which is pretty prevalent on MTV and so forth. I don't know about much music or not. I don't know how relevant it was on that. But it's like, I grew up in the beginning in the East Coast and then moved here to the Midwest. And I just feel like hip-hop had something to say. Like it had people like, your Tupacs, your Biggies, even going back to the 80s of like Grandmaster Flash, Run DMC, even Beastie Boys kind of to a degree. Like, everyone had something to say. There was craft in what they were doing. And it just is one of those things where I don't know if it just speaks to the pure element of music having an art form versus sometimes how I feel now, where I'm like, okay, but like it's a hook, I guess, but like, what the fuck is it really saying? and I just feel old now sometimes when I listen to music, and I'm like, but what is this saying? This doesn't have like any, I don't know, it just has nothing that like grabs me. It's like, okay, like, cool, you got a hook that you repeat like 70 times and it's catchy, but like, it doesn't mean anything, and it took 12 people to write it.
Right. Yeah, a lot of that old hip hop, like, I might not necessarily agree with all the ethics related to the lyrics and stuff, but it's like, it's real, right? There's like an element of true art, as you're saying, to it, because it's real, right? So I appreciate that part of it for sure.
Well, I guess this is as good as any as a segue into the whole point of this, which is to talk about bands and albums that influenced you.
Yes, sir.
And you're kickstarting off this, I guess, 5-part series of talking to the rest of you guys in Misery Signals to basically kind of get to know the albums that shaped you guys all as a band, and maybe some of the records that influenced you as far as writers, as far as lyricists and so forth. And I'm kind of looking forward to this. Like, when you hit me up, I was like, it's not necessarily something we do per se, but like, I'm kind of interested to find out, a band that I've long admired, like, what shaped all of you. So I think it's really interesting, to especially as a lyricist, I'm really excited to go down this rabbit hole with you and learn about some records that, have inspired you one way, shape, or form or another.
Yeah, I think, like, even myself, I'm interested to see what the other guys will come up with, right? Like, we just briefly talked about it, and I myself will be interested to see what their answers are. And just as like, just as a fan of music myself, I mean, yeah, I always like listening to these things and seeing and hearing what inspired some of the artists that I like. So I'm excited to do this, buddy. Thank you for making time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I mean, this is going to be freeform as hell, so I don't know if you have a specific order you want to go in, or you just have 5 and we'll start at 5 and work our way down.
So 5 was really hard for me. I was able to bang it down to 10. I'm going to go chronological, so maybe we'll do 5 today, and if we can do another 5 another time or something like that. But yeah, it was a real task to whittle it down to 5. So we'll do 5 today. But it's going to be
very almost famous of you.
What do you mean? Why?
Because their whole, the whole thing that he, the main character in Almost Famous does, John Cusack's character, it's always in these lists, these top 5 lists, like top 5 breakups, top 5, blah, blah, blah. And then subsequently when he creates his own label to put out that band, the skateboard punk kids that are outside of his shop, it's called Top 5 Records. So it's very, it's one of my favorite movies of all time. So it just kind of was, I was thinking about how very, again, serendipitous it is that it's like one of my favorite movies. Basically the whole thing is top 5 lists and so forth, and top 5 this, top 5 that. And then you're like, let's do a top 5 albums that influence Misery Signals. And I was like, love it.
Yeah, cool. Well, I appreciate your time, old buddy.
Yeah.
So first one, I was raised by some music-loving parents. I was very fortunate to be raised in a household where there was an abundance of music. Parents were very young when they had me. My dad was 18 and mom was 17, so they were young hippies, I guess. I was born in 78, and they were kind of, I would say, very much people that, they were kids in the 60s, but they kind of kept into that style of music and stuff still to this day. So early on, I was very much exposed to lots of David Bowie, lots of Iggy Pop, lots of Lou Reed, lots of 70s kind of glam stuff. And I would say that the most important, it's hard to say, but David Bowie would be probably who I would say is the person who influenced me the most in music, because from a very early age, I definitely gravitated towards his stuff. I always really liked it when mom and dad played that stuff. It's hard to decide which record of his is the best, but there's 3 or 4 that kind of come out one after the other. And Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust is obviously probably the most well-known. And I absolutely love that record, and that was a mainstay in the Misery Signals van back in the day. But I would probably say that my favorite record is the one prior to that, which is called Hunky Dory, which is a little bit more piano-based and a little bit lighter, which is which kind of makes it odd for me because I'm not necessarily a huge piano rock guy, but Hunky Dory definitely just always spoke to me. I know probably every single lyric on that record, and it's just a record that definitely influenced me very much as a young guy, and then still to this day, I guess.
Do you think that record, because it's not as I don't know if bombastic is the word I want to use, but just very as adventurous as maybe as Ziggy Stardust is, do you think it's in that kind of raw and sincere approach that Hunky Dory has is what gravitates it towards you as being your favorite?
I think he's very honest. I think in that record, it is more bare bones musically and also lyrically. It's a little bit more, I don't think there's much show. I think with Ziggy Stardust, he's starting to tell a story, right? And there's a way more of a fictional element to it.
Yeah.
But I think with Hunky Dory, it's a lot more realism. It's a lot more to do with his life and his relationships. And maybe because he's a little bit more youthful too, there's maybe it might be a little more naive or something. But yeah, it's a standout record to me. And I think there's a lot of great tracks on there, but I think Life on Mars is probably the one that, I would say is my favorite, but that's always a hard thing to say. What's your favorite?
Well, I think it's just interesting because I think especially with it as an enigmatic artist as Bowie, who spanned many decades, spanned many genres and so forth, and had different iterations of a look and so forth. I think that's kind of the fun thing about some of these artists who were so timeless, is that you could pick a certain era maybe, and it kind of encapsulates you and what gravitated you toward them at that point. I mean, it's like, I guess some people would say that with Kiss, there's certain eras of Kiss that people like more than the others, or, someone for me that I think, I gravitate toward. There's two people off the top of my head thinking about the same ways, like a Bryan Adams or for me, a Rod Stewart. They encompass so many different styles of music, and it kind of really depends on where you came in or what you kind of identify with.
Sure. Yep.
And I think all four of those artists are basically transcendent as far as what they are and how they can be viewed from a fan base.
Right. Yep, I agree.
I'm closer to the golden dawn, immersed in Crowley's uniform of imagery. I'm living in a silent film, portraying Himmler's sacred realm of dream reality. I'm frightened by the total goal, drawing to the ragged hole, and I ain't got the power anymore. No, I ain't got the power anymore. I'm the twisted name on Garbo's eyes, living proof of Churchill's lies. I'm destiny. I'm torn between the light and dark, where others see their target, divine symmetry. Did I kiss the viper's fang, or herald loud the death of man? I'm sinking in the quicksand of my thoughts, and I ain't got the power anymore. Don't believe in yourself, don't deceive with belief. Knowledge comes with death's release. Just a mortal with potential of a Superman. I'm living on. I'm tethered to the logic of Homo sapien. Can't take my eyes from the great salvation of bullshit faith. If I don't explain what you ought to know, you can tell me all about it on the next photo. I'm sinking in the quicksand of my thoughts, and I ain't got the power anymore.
what's your number 4?
Number 4 and number 2 would be Motley Crue, Shout at the Devil, which again is a hard choice because Motley Crue is sort of the first band that I really got into outside of my parents' influence. It was the first thing that, Twisted Sister, Stay Hungry I got actually when I was 6 for my 6th Christmas. Shout out to my Auntie Wanda who got that for me for my 6th Christmas, which is pretty awesome. But the first band that I really loved on my own was Motley Crue. And I heard Theater of Pain first because Smoking in the Boys' Room was a big hit at that point on radio and on video hits, Canadian music video show. Before Much Music, this is.
Okay.
So Smoking in the Boys' Room, obviously one of their more sort of polished cover hits, and I think as a little guy that at least hooked me. It wasn't too crazy heavy or anything like that. And so I got Theater of Pain. I think it was about 8 years old. And that's the first Motley Crue record that I had. And I think it's actually one of the worst records they put out.
It's a bad record.
But it's the first one that I had, So soon thereafter, there was some long-haired older dudes in my little area that I lived, and they had Shout at the Devil. So soon thereafter, a guy named Brian Adcock showed me Shout at the Devil, and then I got Too Fast for Love next, and that's when I'm 8. And so the next year is 1987, and Girls out, and I'm super into that as well. I got that for my birthday the next year. My dad got me that, but it's Theater of Pain that opened that door. It's Theater of Pain that really hooked me with the Crue. So I have to go with Theater of Pain, although I know a lot of people will say that it's not the best record. It's the one that probably influenced me the most. But as I said, Shout at the Devil came out, or I got my hands on Shout at the Devil shortly thereafter, and I would admit that is the superior record, and I would even say Too Fast for Love is far superior record as well. But Shout at the Devil definitely heavily influential on me, and some of the deeper cuts are actually the ones that, as an older guy, I still find myself listening to, like the last track, Danger, and stuff like Knock 'em Dead Kid. Not really the hits, not even songs on the first side. Really, I think I tend to like the second side more on that record nowadays.
Well, you look at a song like Too Young to Fall in Love, I feel like is a great song, but it was more almost I feel like that was like a leftover song that maybe wasn't finished from Too Fast for Love.
Right.
But it just, I don't know, it's so weird. Motley Crue was a band for me. I love that band as well. And Shout at the Devil was really interesting because I think I came into the band as a kid, because I think you're about 6 years older than me. And so Dr. Feelgood was my first experience with Motley Crue and the videos and so forth. But as I've gone back as an adult, I definitely think Shout at the Devil has something more polished and realized versus the youthful exuberance of Too Fast for Love. And I don't know, it is kind of interesting. And I want to pose the question, because this is the day of cassettes and vinyl and so forth, and maybe CDs. Did you have the original album artwork for this album?
For Shout, so the first cassette tape that I saw from my friend Brian in his basement, I believe it's the second, so it's the 4 pictures of them on the cassette cover. Now I own the record now with the pentagram and everything. And I probably got that when I was 15 or 16 or something like that. But yeah, I think the first inception that I saw was the 4 pictures on the cover one.
Was there a sense of, because, I didn't really remember this as a kid, and maybe it's just how I grew up or whatever. Was there really much of you can't have this because there's a pentagram on the cover and they're a Satan-worshipping band? Was there much of that when you were getting into this record?
I would say at that time, yeah. I would say in 86 in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, there was some... yeah, it was kind of it was a hot thing to have, because it was a little bit forbidden, it was a little bit pushing boundaries, you know what I mean? We kind of look back on it now and it's kind of a joke, right? Obviously there's TV shows and stuff made about, the attack on heavy metal in the 80s and stuff. But at that point, I mean, it was new to a lot of people, and it was freaking people out. And some of that imagery, it was effective, right? Like, I mean, it was, some of those bands just chose that stuff because it was effective, because it sold records. But I remember, listening to that in the basement as an 8-year-old kid and being a little scared, being a little intimidated by the song titles, God Bless the Children of the Beast. I remember taking it home and listening to it, and kind of not, being intimidated, being intrigued. It was this very mysterious, amazing group of guys that looked like they were kind of from outer space, kind of like Kiss or something, So it was, as a young guy who loved comic books and loved, scary movies and stuff, they were a cool band.
Out of curiosity, earlier, and this is kind of the last we'll touch on this before we go on to your next record, but, you touched on Twisted Sister, being a fan of them, and obviously Motley Crue. Did the PRMC, is it PMRC or PMRC, did that stuff get over to you over in Canada, or was that kind of more focused here regionally in the U.S.?
It was a United States thing. I mean, we obviously heard about it, and now as an older person, I obviously know lots about it. So it's hard to say at the time when I'm 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that kind of stuff, how aware I was of it, I can't really say.
See, I remember growing up at that point, because like CDs were in long boxes, and I remember like Appetite for Destruction that was one of the first records I can remember getting the parental advice sticker for it, for some of the lyrical content, but also basically what was originally the original album cover, which then
the
was
rape scene,
the Appetite for Destruction on the inside of the album cover, and which was the original album cover. So like, I do remember there being concessions made at a young age, but not really understanding what they meant and why. But just like, oh, now music has this sticker on it, and certain things have changed.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I mean, I grew up in a household of basically raised by hippies that were very liberal, very lenient. So it's funny. Like, my old man listened to a lot of Stooges, a lot of Clash, and none of that stuff, I guess, raised any alarms for him, and really no Crew or anything did for him. But my mom was raised in a fairly religious household. So I remember around the same time, and one of those older metal kids that I hung out with gave me an Iron Maiden, the Number of the Beast flag. And I remember bringing that home, and my mom being a little bit, well, more than a little bit weirded out about it. She made me cut off the part that said the Number of the Beast on the bottom. Now, ironically, if you know that image, I mean, it's the image of Eddie, and he's got puppet strings, and he's controlling the devil, Lucifer, and then Lucifer has puppet strings, and he's controlling man, right? So the whole image itself is like pretty extreme for an 8-year-old kid to have on his wall. It's just funny looking back now and thinking, oh yeah, Mom made me cut off the words, the Number of the Beast, but she allowed me to have that, the devil on my wall or whatever, but it's
Yeah. What do you got for number 3?
Number 3, my man. This is an interesting one. And I'm, like I said earlier, I'm intrigued about what the rest of the guys will say. And definitely, I think I would assume that Metallica will make, I would think, everybody's list, you know. So I would have to go with Ride the Lightning. And I'm, interested to see what the other guys will say about this. Metallica, for me, first time I heard them, I was skateboarding on a launch ramp, and I heard Anesthesia Pulling Teeth was the first thing I remember. So the very first thing I ever recall hearing of Metallica, I might have heard them in passing skateboarding or whatever earlier, but, bass solo, take 1. I remember hearing that, and it really, really stuck with me. I think just the fact that you heard that engineer or whatever saying that wasn't normal. I don't recall hearing that in my parents' records or any of my Motley Crue records. You know, that person talking, saying bass solo, take 1, it stuck with me. I mean, it was a very memorable moment, and I love that. I love Kill 'Em All, but I don't think it's by any means as strong as a record as Ride the Lightning or Master, or maybe even Justice, but that's a hard call. But again, I would say Ride the Lightning would be my most important Metallica record, I would say. I heard Kill 'Em All first, but Ride the Lightning I heard with my Uncle Trevor, who was a very influential person in my life as well when it comes to music. My Uncle Trevor is my mom's youngest brother, so he was only 8 years older than me. So like when I'm like 8 and 9, like he's like 15, 16, 17
so
in the 80s, right?
That older brother role.
Totally. And so he is the first guy to play when I'm 6, maybe 7. He gives me a mixtape, and on one side of it is AC/DC High Voltage, and on the other side of it is Rat, Invasion of Privacy. And I listen to those. I listen to that tape a lot. I think about a year later, I'm in his car cruising, and he's like, "You got to listen to this band." And he puts in Metallica, Ride the Lightning. And I remember Trapped Under Ice, I think, is the first thing I heard. And he played music so loud all the time, like as a teenage guy in that car. And that was just the most extreme thing I had ever heard at that point, and so I fell in love with that record that day, and it's still a record that I absolutely adore. I just think like Creeping Death and Call of Cthulhu are some of the finest heavy metal songs ever written. So Ride the Lightning for me is the one I have to go with when it comes to Metallica, even though it's definitely a hard choice.
I definitely know for me, like I had gotten into Metallica probably around the Black Album was when I became aware of them as a person getting into heavy metal and so forth. But sure. I think one of the first records I actually bought of Metallica's was Ride the Lightning, and it was on the strength of For Whom the Bell Tolls, Fade to Black, Trapped Under Ice, which I mean later would become a great hardcore band that I enjoyed seeing live. And Creeping Death, Call of Cthulhu, like you said, like this was a band at the time, and it was really weird because the Black Album was one of those where I feel like some of the more emphasis on bigger song arrangements and so forth and storytelling was still there. But when I went back to this record specifically, it just was like, oh, wow, like I'd never heard a band do this. And I don't know, it is kind of weird to kind of think about how finding a band and not being so far removed from like the first couple of records they put out when you're starting to get into a band. And I just, I don't know that people can do that really anymore. Because you can find anything at the drop of a dime now. Like you don't have to be an active participant in sitting down and discovering music from a very ethereal kind of standpoint. And I feel like sometimes if you're more predominantly a metal, hardcore, whatever person, there are some benchmark records that come out. And I think this is one of those records that if you're into this kind of music, this kind of scene, this is one of those records that kind of is your trial by fire to kind of learn why it's important to like a band like Metallica and what this band did and what they did for many other musicians and band people moving forward from this point. And it's kind of interesting. A song like A Call of Cthulhu, like as I'm thinking about it now and talking to you, I actually see a lot of parallels where I'm like, you know what? I bet a young Jesse probably listens to this. And when you start doing something Misery Signals-esque, or even, you know, some of the other bands that you were in, where it's like, oh, there's kind of these like long songs and you got to fit a lot of like verbiage in it, and you're telling a story over this, you know, very sweeping song that takes 3, 4, 5, 6 minutes or so. And it starts making more sense. And it's like, you know, this definitely isn't a record I probably would have picked out and been like, oh, Jesse probably really loves this record. But now that you're saying these things, I'm like, there are songs on this record I totally can understand, like how the seeds of what would later on become sort of your vocal style and the band's approach would definitely be planted by listening to a record like this.
Musically, I mean, there's a lot of melody, right? And there's a lot of those interludes. There's a lot of those intro sections. Call of Cthulhu on its own, like, there's bits of that on Kill 'Em All, but not really. That stuff starts to come to the forefront in Ride the Lightning, and then really, obviously, on Master of Puppets and Justice, it's very, very apparent, right? It's a big part of their thing. You know, it's super heavy at times, and then super melodic and nice at times. And I think, Misery Signals has always tried to encompass those extremes. You know, it's. When I first heard Seven Angels for the first time, that it really struck me too. And it reminded me of Ride the Lightning and stuff. The Seven Angels and their ability on Jasmine's, especially, to sort of have these very beautiful musical sections and then go into, like, you know, just the most heavy metal stuff around. It was something that definitely made me like Seven Angels right away.
And to clarify, just to make sure that those who may be listening that maybe don't know this, you're referring to Seven Angels, Seven Plagues?
Yes, I'm referring to Seven Angels, Seven Plagues, which is the band that some of the guys from Misery Signals were in prior.
Right. Just want to make sure, you know, because sometimes, like, when people potentially are listening to this, they may be, like, people who may listen to only my podcast but may not know the lineage of where Misery Signals come from, so may not know that. So I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. If, go and check out Seven Angels, Seven Plagues, Jasmine's Lullaby. It's very, very, very important record.
Number two.
Number two. See, I'm going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You're going the other way. So this is 2 for you, 4 for me. This one's related to Metallica in ways, and I'll see if you know how this is related to Metallica.
Okay.
Band called SNFU, which is initially from Edmonton, Alberta, here where I'm from, and then moved out to Vancouver, where they got much bigger and started to kind of be on more of like skate punk compilations and stuff. They got on Epitaph for the last few records, but as a kid growing up here in Edmonton, they were just this big punk rock band that was in the scene. And as a kid, as a skateboarding kid, I just would see, like, I remember the first time I think I saw the name was there's this like older skater kid that I used to skate with, and he had a cast on, and on his cast it said SNFU. And that's the first time that I recall seeing, you know, those letters. And then just I would see it spray painted on walls at St. Teresa School, close to where I grew up. And eventually I realized that this was a punk rock band, and I heard them a few times. I was exposed to a lot of punk rock, early punk rock from my father, but like I said before, more like Iggy and more like The Clash. So SNFU was a different kind of thing, a lot more, I shouldn't say more dirty than Iggy, but just a kind of just a little bit different, you know. And to me, it was quite sonically something that I wasn't quite used to, right? I came from more, as I said, a heavy metal kind of background. I got into metal on my own, and then on my parents' side, a lot of, you know, 70s rock and 60s rock and that kind of stuff. So SNFU was a new kind of weird thing. I would stay up late on Fridays, Saturdays here in Edmonton, and they have the university here has a radio station called CJSR, and they would have, after midnight, if you stayed up late, they would play heavy metal and they would play punk rock. That's where I first heard Suicidal Tendencies. That's where I first heard SNFU. Just really cool stuff. Like I would stay up with my little ghetto blaster, and I would tape that radio show onto blank tapes. And then a lot of times, you know, as a little guy, I wouldn't even know who wrote these songs. I just knew the songs, you know. So there's songs that my brother and I have on these tapes that only in the last 5 or 10 years we've found out through the internet who wrote these songs, you know. Like they're just old punk rock songs from small American or Canadian bands. But just super important to us as young Edmonton kids that, you know, growing up here in Edmonton, like, it's very different from being in LA or being in New York or something like that. You were quite far removed, right? So as you were talking about before, you really had to seek out music, search music out. And that CJSR was super important to me as a young guy, and exposing me to more punk rock and more metal and stuff that wasn't in the mainstream, you know. Like I could get Twisted Sister records because I saw them, you know, on TV. I could get Motley Crue records because I saw them on TV, and I could go and ask about them, you know. But stuff like SNFU and Suicidal Tendencies and stuff, like it was harder to get to, and it was only through kind of really searching that you could find those things, right? Like I remember shortly thereafter, like reading Thrasher magazine lots, and so there would always be Suicidal shirts in there and stuff, right? And you start piecing these things together, but it's like, as a young person, it's also mysterious and cool, you know. And it's a different day now, right? It's such a different time now with the internet and stuff. But back then, it was like only Friday night or Saturday night, if I stayed up late and recorded this show, I could get all this new crazy heavy music, you know. It was really, really cool, really, is what it was.
Well, like 2 points to that. I think, you know, kind of going to your point of, you know, you found out about bands because of either bands saying they're in, you know, I definitely think the liner notes and the thank yous thing is kind of a thing in the past. Like, you know, that was something that myself and people of our age would look at liner notes of albums and be like, oh, this band thanks so-and-so or is influenced by so-and-so. And we would then go and see what that band was about. And then, you know, we'd kind of fall down the rabbit hole of finding those bands if we could. And I think to the point of you asked how how the tie to Metallica to SNFU ties, and I think it's a band, I could be wrong, but I think I remember James Hetfield wearing a shirt of theirs on the Garage Days record, which is a covers album, which then obviously showcases that the band Metallica paying it forward to bands that influence them, to maybe at a time where people didn't know of these bands. Like I'm thinking of a band like the Misfits. I would definitely say that the Misfits, at that point weren't gone technically, but their heyday had already been gone by about 10 years. Danzig had already left. He had already started his solo career and so forth. So you're kind of hearing these songs and you're like, oh, what is it? Bread fan? And it's like, okay, no one is a fan of that band that created that song until Metallica covered it. And if you like that band, I'm probably going to say you're full of shit, but, it is what it is. But it does remind me of a time where you learned about bands because of the bands you were into, either wearing their shirts or thanking them in liner notes and so forth. And I feel like that's just, like we're kind of harping on a little bit, but it's like you had to be a fan, and you had to actively seek out things that you were interested in back in these days. And you couldn't just be a passive fan of something. Like, if you wanted to be a fan of something, you had to put in the effort and try. And I think that's something that's missing from music now, because it's just so readily available and you can just find anything at the drop of a dime. And like you're saying, like I have mixed CDs where people made me, CDs and didn't give me anything of who it was. And it isn't until recently where I could go, hey, Siri, what is, this song or whatever. And I'm finally, 15 years after getting some of these CDs, learning who some of these bands are, if they're even able to be found. But there's still sometimes a sense of mystery where it's kind of nice, like, to have something exist on a mixtape or a mix CD, and it only exists in that format for you, and you just kind of have fallen in love with that one song. And it's kind of pure. It's in a weird sense where it's like you didn't have any other records, you didn't have any outside influence to tell you whether you should like this or not. You just like it undeniably because it is what it is, and that's the only way that you know that this band and this song exists, and you don't know anything else by them. And it's kind of really cool to know that we're old enough to kind of remember stuff like that. And I feel really bad for a lot of people who can't, just live in that bubble of having this one song that means so much to them, but knowing nothing about it.
Yeah. I mean, there's good and bad in it, right? But it was more mysterious back then, and there's something about not knowing a lot that I guess as a kid you kind of like fabricated things in your mind, or like you just thought about these bands and this music on a different level than nowadays. I mean, you would just go to the internet, right? And you look it up and you can find out all sorts of stuff, who these guys are, what other bands they might have played in, what they look like. Like, as a kid, I remember like seeing Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park as a kid, like seeing that show, and like really as a 5 or 6 year old boy, kind of thinking like these guys had powers. Like, I actually thought Kiss could do all those things. I thought Starchild could shoot lasers out of his eyes. I thought that the Cat could like jump over fences. Like, that made me, I think, love rock and roll even more, right? Because I thought these guys were actual living comic book characters or something, right? That's completely lost now. Like, that couldn't happen, really.
No, sadly.
You can't believe that Kiss can do all their great feats anymore.
Well, I mean, Gene would have believed that you could buy all those powers, I'm sure, at this point.
What a prick.
Definitely.
Yeah, that guy. So SNFU, there is the first record they put out is called And No One Else Wanted to Play, which is, if you're familiar with that, the cover is a photograph by a woman named Diane Arbus. It's just like this little boy holding a grenade. It's become a pretty famous image. They, I think, got sued because they used it without her permission. But the early prints of that are worth quite a bit. And that's the first, I remember seeing that image a lot, but it was the third record that I got from them first. It's called Better Than a Stick in the Eye. There's small independent record store here when I was a kid called Sound Connection, and you could go there and there would be a local section that would have local bands, punk rock stuff, and it's also the place where you could like order in a lot of metal stuff. So as I became a teenager, that's where I first like ordered Madball CDs and Sick of It All and stuff that was not super readily available. But that's where I first got my first SNFU tape, and it was the third one, Better Than a Stick in the Eye, which, again, I don't think is my favorite record, but it was the biggest influence on me at that point, because as a 9-year-old boy, that's the first one that I got. So I encourage people to go out and check out SNFU because they are a fantastic punk rock band. But they're cool. I mean, like, because they were on the back of Garage Days too, like as a young guy, seeing that there was this punk rock band from Edmonton and James Hetfield is wearing their shirt, it encouraged me, right? And it showed me that, okay, like, yeah, you don't have to be from LA or New York City. You can make a mark even if you were just from, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. So it was.
Is that where they're from? I always thought they were from Manitoba.
No, SNFU was initially from Edmonton, and then they moved to Vancouver.
Okay.
Manitoba bands that are big is me like Figure 4 and Comeback Kid were kind of the big ones to come out of there. Okay.
I thought I had read somewhere a long time ago that they're from Manitoba.
No, I believe they played there quite often as they toured Canada, but they were an Edmonton-based band initially, and then West Coast.
Fair enough.
And I had to work much harder for some of that
What do you have for your last record?
There you go, number 5. Number 5, we'll go with Madball, Demonstrating My Style. So, growing up as a young metaler, I would always buy metal magazines. Metal Maniacs was one that I bought a lot through my teenage years, and Metal Maniacs was, very like death metal magazine. At that point in my life, when I'm in my early teens, I'm starting to play in metal bands and very much into a lot of kind of death metal stuff. Cynic I liked a lot. Deicide, stuff like that. And Metal Maniacs was mostly concerned with that kind of stuff, but they also did branch out into hardcore. So it's in Metal Maniacs where I first saw Sick of It All. It's in Metal Maniacs where I first saw or heard about Madball, and so I remember reading about Demonstrating My Style, and I went to that Sound Connection store and ordered it, and soon thereafter it came, and that was a big game changer for me, because I think, Freddie's lyrics are real, as we were talking about with hip hop before. Like, there's this street realness or something to it. And musically, it was more metal, right? Like during that time especially, didn't really gravitate towards much punk rock. And so a lot of hardcore was sort of lost on me, because I always kind of, the punk rock side of it or something, I didn't always like. But Madball still had that real metallic side to things. And so it was them and Sick of It All that really kind of, started to show me that, punk rock and metal could be mixed and could create something really, really, really amazing.
Man, Madball, God, those dudes are still crushing it. It really sucks. They were just here recently, and like nobody went, and I was like, that's a shame.
It was, for me, like that was the last tour that I did with Misery Signals. They kicked me out on that tour when there was 3 or 4 shows left. So I grew up just loving that band, and like Madball, Sick of It All, Snapcase. And Misery Signals, tours lots for those first few years that I'm in the band, and then we get this Madball tour, and for me it was just like, it couldn't, I would have been, it was the most important band basically for me to be touring with. It was super influential band, so it was a very important tour for us to get on, and I was very happy and proud to be able to have toured with those guys back then. But yeah, they are a great band, and I encourage people to support Madball, because they are a super important band in the history of hardcore and metal.
Well, that is your 5 records that influenced you. I don't know who will be next, but I'm very much looking forward to, like you said, I'm very much looking forward to seeing what everybody else has in store for what influenced them. I think with the brothers, I'm interested to see how much crossover there is or carryover between what they maybe were growing up listening to, because I assume there's got to be, like any brothers in any band, especially if you're playing drums and guitar, that there's got to be carryover where it's like, oh, it's Van Halen because we both, gravitated toward that, or, I don't know what, but like I'm interested to see anything. Actually, I think Kyle is the one I'm most interested to hear what influenced him, because he's kind of the more quiet one.
Kyle, yeah. No, they'll be good interviews. I look forward to them myself.
Well, hate to tease it. We've been teasing it on this show for so long, especially as of recently. You and I have a very long conversation approaching soonish, when everything finally can fall into place. But until that time, where can everyone find you and or the band or whatever it is you want to plug online?
You just miserysignals.net. You can find us on Instagram, Facebook. They are going to be, by the time this gets out, it'll be announced already, so it's no big deal. We're going to be doing a West Coast thing with Darkest Hour through April. And then there will be a lot more to be announced in the next month. I just don't want to say anything here right now. But yeah, new record is going to be coming out very soon, and we will be touring quite a bit this year. So just keep your eyes peeled, and thanks for the support, and thanks to you, John, for the support, buddy.
Yeah, it's been It's been really hard to keep some of these these secrets over the last 2.5 years where you're like, we're doing this. And I'm like, can we talk about that? You're like, not yet. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's not an easy band to be in. Like, I mean, we're all super excited to be doing this, but it's taken a little bit of time, right? Because everybody has, Stuart has comeback kid, and Ryan and I have kids, and Rye coaches jiu-jitsu, and I'm a school teacher, and still a whole lot of hurdles to get over, but we're really excited about what we've brought together, and we can't wait for people to hear it.
I know a lot of people seem to be very excited about your Furnace Fest appearance that was announced.
Yeah, that's going to be a really good time. That's the only real show that I ever played with Seven Angels was there. And that is also just not very far from where the Compromise crash happened. So it's a special area for us. And we're all very, very excited to get to go back down there and play that stage again, because it's maybe the most interesting and unique venue I've ever played in my life. And I know that just based on what they've been able to do with the bands that they're bringing back, it's a special thing. I think people are really excited about it, and I think it's going to be a wonderful weekend.
I know my co-host is very excited to try to go. Hopefully as media, worst case, he's going to go by himself. But I know if my wife wasn't planning a trip to my favorite area in Atlanta for my 36th, that probably would be where I would go, because there's so many of my friends playing that show at this point, and I'm just like, I kind of want to go to that. But I know, a couple of fests early in the year for my wife would probably be very like torturous, where she's like, I'm not like 18 and I don't want to be surrounded by people doing karate kicks in the air for 3 days.
Well, I think with this one, there's going to be a lot of older people, so there might be karate kicks, but I don't think they'll be as forceful, and I think they might be a lot lower.
Man, you don't know, man. People might be in Planet Fitness right now on that 20-cent plan, just getting into shape, ready for this Furnace Fest.
That's right. Work out to get ready for Furnace Fest. There you go.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time tonight, and looking forward to catching up with you here soonish.
Thanks so much, sir. You have a very good evening, and we'll chat soon.
You as well.